all excited for that new Six Nations to start very soon now. Well, to be honest, I didn't see it coming. I guess it came as a surprise for me, like for all the rugby fans. No one's got his spot safe for the World Cup, and also everybody, if he's performing, is welcome into the squad as well. So it shows also that you have to constantly perform at the highest level. I also believe you'd rather not pick him because you mentioned me earlier on, that it could be a wake-up call. I guess if he wins, everybody will say he was right. And if he loses, everybody will say he was wrong. What's important to consider, especially because we spoke about on-form players, Six Nations is the peak of our season with games in France, so it's under high pressure, and that's important. The players are experiencing that as well.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode here on the Coach G Show. Today I want to talk about something every elite player eventually faces, not being selected. Because Fabien Galthié has just made one of the biggest selection statements we've seen in French rugby for a long time, leaving out Gaël Fickou, Grégory Alldritt and Damien Penaud, heading into the Six Nations. 3 leaders, 3 proven internationals, and 3 guys who on their day can win you a tournament. So the question is, why now? Why make this call 18 months before a World Cup cycle really ramps up? Is this a form issue, a standard issue, a culture reset, or is it a message to the entire squad? Nobody is safe. In this episode, we're going to break down the logic from the coach's side as well from the agent's point of view, the timing, the risk, and the bigger strategy. But we're also going to go into the part people ignore. What do you do when you don't get picked? How do you respond like a pro, without ego, without excuses, and turn it into fuel? And to get stuck into this conversation, I've asked my good friend Damien Dussault to join us today. Damien, brother, how are you doing? How's things your side?
Yeah, I'm all good. I guess all excited for that new Six Nations to start very soon now. So all good. Sun is shining in France at the moment, almost. Probably better than in the other countries of the Six Nations.
Oh, man, compared to, what was it, about 3 weeks ago, we had -8 and it was freezing. Our windows were frozen. It's so much better.
Exactly. Well, I guess great conditions to play good rugby, I assume.
All right, Damien. So I'll ask you to join me today, because I do feel, it's a very heated topic at the moment. World rugby has been quite interesting the last week. We saw the sacking of Scott Robertson, and now the massive statement by Fabien Galthié with the omission of 3 key players in the French squad: Gaël Fickou, Greg Alldritt, and Damien Penaud. All right, these players have always been key to the French side. They're all leaders, key roles. Damien Penaud being one of probably the leading try scorer for the French team, if I'm not mistaken. You will correct me on that. But yes, Damien, I would like to get your thoughts on that. Did you see that coming? And do you think it's a good thing for French rugby?
Well, to be honest, I didn't see it coming. I guess it came as a surprise for me, like for all the rugby fans. I assume it's a good timing probably for Fabien Galthié to do that. 18 months going to the World Cup, trying to give experience to some other players. He's already spoken to the media about the fact that he just for today, maybe those 3 players are gonna come back later on, and I don't know obviously the specifics for each of them or the conversations they've had with Fabien Galthié and the staff of France, but I think it's also a good a good call in the sense to say to everybody, no one's got his spot safe for the World Cup, and also everybody, if he's performing, is welcome into the squad as well.
No, it's brilliant because I think it sends a clear signal to everybody. I think that's very important. You just mentioned it's 18 months away from the World Cup. And, if we maybe got to break down each player in terms, do you think this was performance-based, or do you believe that there's so many great youngsters that is like on form? If we got to take the example of Gaël Fickou, we have seen the likes of, De Porter. He's been on fire for Bordeaux. He's been unbelievable, along with that connection with LBB, Louis Bielle-Biarrey, all these guys, and recently seen Mofana back in the mix as well. I think he's been back now for a few weeks again. So it's also interesting maybe to have a look at that, that connection, that Bordeaux connection. Do you think that's playing a role in the non-selection of Gaël Fickou?
I assume so. Fabien Galthié already said that. Obviously, he speaks 42 players to go to Marcoussis, but he said he already knows who are the 28 that he's going to bring to play against Ireland. So he also said to the majors, which is a good point, I guess, that experienced players don't have to be like sparring partners at training. So they'd rather probably a refresh in their club or having a bit of an holiday instead of doing that. And I think that's more also there's a mix between being on form, recent performances with the national team, recent performances with the club, and also players being able to play together. Obviously, Penaud, to take that example, has been brilliant for France for years and everything, but there are a lot of youngsters coming through. So it shows also that you have to constantly perform at the highest level, and nowadays I think also players have to be complete. Like there's been a lot of talks about Penaud's defense as an example, or his game under the high balls, where some of the players have been maybe better and maybe less creative in attack. To tell Penaud is like an incredible player, like Bolinens. He can create something on his own from anywhere to go almost try on his own. But I guess that's not enough. I guess now if you want to win top games, you need players that can do absolutely everything and cover every aspect of what is expected for their position in the game.
Yeah, no, I believe it's a big statement, regarding Gaël Fickou. I really love him as a player, and just how he's grown as a lead over the years. And, I definitely feel for him, 2 games out, if I'm not mistaken, to get his 100th cap for France. But, Fabien has left that door open, as you just mentioned in the medias, that potentially they might come back. But I do believe that this could potentially serve as a great wake-up call. I obviously coached Greg at La Rochelle, and he's a great leader, a brilliant player at the time, probably one of the best in the world. But you got to be honest, like some of the players that are performing now in top 14, and top 14 is probably one of the toughest competitions, and also some of the number 8s that have been performing in the Champions Cup as well. If you look at I think it's Mathieu from Bordeaux, if I'm not mistaken. And obviously you got Charles Olivon, and I think maybe, and this is what my logic is, that Fabian's potentially maybe looking at having a number 8 that's a potential more, like, how can you say, like we say in French, a bit more plutonic, but someone that's a bit more rapid, that has a bit more acceleration. Greg is someone that is slightly heavier and someone that always win the game, but maybe he's looking for someone to maybe bring a different element. So if we have to focus on the number 8 position, what do you believe Fabien Galthié is looking for at the moment?
Well, firstly, to answer on the 3 players that we're talking about, I think there's also an element that's very important to understand for people from other countries. In France, we probably put a lot more a bigger eye on the behavior of the players that are going to be left out, and are there going to be a problem being in the squad but not playing, or being benched, or being in the stands. And I'm not saying this is the case for the 3 of them, but there had been many talks about Galthié or didn't say it really publicly, but kind of mentions that he won't pick some players that he knows that either they're number 1 or they're not. And those players also, if they're not anymore number 1 in the mind of Galthié, can they be impact players? That's also another question probably to ask, because I assume under French culture, the squad or the life of the group in Marcoussis or in camp before a big game like a Six Nation tournament game is very important. And I guess French players in general, Latin players show more their anger or their temper, or is they angry or is they unhappy, than probably in certain other countries where it will be less allowed, I assume. So I think that's also one of these cases. Because if you look at the whole squad, he's also picked some players that haven't played much recently. Are very experienced.
But Damien, I just want to interrupt you a bit because you're opening up a completely different topic there, which is brilliant, and I want to touch base on. But the question I want you to really answer is that, do you think the performance of Mathieu and Oliver and the style of rugby that Galthié potentially had a massive impact in his decision? I do agree with you. I think what you're talking about there is when a guy's not selected, will he be sulking? Will he be mad? Will he be disruptive for team? And that's valuable points, so we can talk about that. But what is your take on the selection choice regarding at number 8 position from Fabien Galthié?
Well, I mean, we don't have real big classic number 8 in France. I mean, the guys that is very heavy for collisions. It's not what we have. So I assume maybe he's trying to also put a combination of different players in terms of how much impact they can have ball in hands, how much impact they can have all together in defense. You probably also think about the line out. That's always a difficult one, because that's a choice and that's a philosophy of game is choosing. And I guess if he wins, everybody will say he was right, and if he loses, everybody will say he was wrong and he should have picked probably some more experienced players. Because the question behind that as well is, there's a strategy you put together, I think, as a coach, and there's also the squad you put together and the experience. Some guys like Fickou, Alldritt or Damien Penaud could bring also to the squad on and off the pitch. It's something that's probably gonna be missed by the younger players. But you can also sometimes choose to go for a fresh team, if I may say it this way, or fresh guys, and guys that are uncapped or that don't have many caps already under their belt. And maybe they prove that they are the right guys for the job. Again, I think to finish on that, I think there's a question of strategy, and we don't really know all the details about what Fabien Galthié wants to do. I mean, we are out of the autumn international test were quite disappointing. France wasn't very bad, but didn't play really great rugby and struggled at times, even against Fiji or against Australia. That wasn't those weren't easy games. And I think also what's important to consider, especially because we spoke about on-form players, Six Nations is the peak of our season. Because, I mean, autumn test, we're very good. We're supposedly very good, and the Southern Hemisphere team at the end of the season. And in June, that's going to be the opposite. We're going to be at the end of our season, when they're going to be in the middle of the season for some of them, especially Australia and New Zealand. It's probably a bit different now for the Springboks. But I guess Fabien Galthié wants also to give experience to guys. When you look at the younger players, like you take the centers, he picked Bois-Boiry, Calvin Gourg, Noah Nene, players that are quite inexperienced at this level. But they need to get that experience if he wants them to be in contention for the World Cup. And the June tests are not necessarily always good experience, because sometimes you just play with I don't like to call it a B team, but you drop some of the guys that played the finals or semi-finals of top 14. So you kind of don't go full strength, and you make those guys get experience, but this is not the full experience, because they know already they might get smashed because they're gonna play the best team of, say, the All Blacks, when they don't have the best team of France around them. So I think that's a good call also to give experience, also because the Six Nations is in Europe with games in France, so it's under high pressure, and that's important. The players are experiencing that as well.
Now, you made some valid points there. I think, I'll be honest. I'm going to give my insights here because I do believe. And firstly, David, I think we need to correct things because you got slashed the last time we won this podcast. We put a clip on that you just used the word controversial, and it just triggered a massive response on Instagram.
I will never speak publicly about the sport.
So just maybe I do advise people that saw that clip of Damien, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram, when he was talking about controversial, he wasn't mentioning and saying he agrees that certain decisions in that quarterfinal was controversial. It's just the way the French people was perceiving it. He was trying to do that. So I would advise you guys to listen to that full episode. But Damien, what I believe is that we need to be honest. I believe the French team, with the build up to the World Cup, their success were on key players that were performing. You know, you obviously had Alldritt back then was performing, and all these key like Dupont and Ntamak, and when we've picked up from the past, when those key players are not there, the French team at the stage wasn't the same without with Ntamak, with Romain Ntamak, and then as well the same thing. Antoine Dupont, when he's not 100%, not the same player, doesn't have the same effect. And I think Galthié has realized that their system was too focused on certain players, right? And as we would say in France, they focused a lot, ils ont appuyé beaucoup sur le cadre. So that means they were focused a lot on your key players, the leaders. And when that team is not, that players are not there, it's not the same French team. And I think he's realized now it's not just about developing the system, but potentially developing more number one players in key positions. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to be happening when Ntamak is fully fit. Obviously, Jalibert has been on another planet at the moment. But I do believe, I agree with you, I think he's realized 18 months out, you know, I've got players which I've been using for years, who have been my leaders, have been my performance. But what if they're not performing? What if they get injured? Who do I have next? So I do believe it's a very intelligent decision. And I do think the French public has not been used to this type of success like they've achieved, but they've experienced in the build-up to the World Cup in 2023, because that's probably one of the eras where the French team has been the most consistent and probably the most performant teams. And making a decision like this that can eventually pay off later or potentially, you know, bite him in the ass afterwards, you know. So the French are not used to it because they want performance now. They want to win now. I do think sometimes they don't always think of the longer game. So it's going to be interesting because it's just a special mention there. Grégory Alldritt. Wow, this guy's impressive. He plays for Pau. Been watching in the aerial game. And if you look at the French, they also use the aerial game quite a lot, and they're looking for the type of players that can get that ball back. So I do believe he's going to keep. But you touched base there earlier before I interrupted you, and also that maybe explains the reason why they're not in the group of 42. You know, you mentioned the Latin players. You know, they are different to your Anglo-Saxon and Southern Hemisphere players. If you can elaborate a bit more on that would be great for our audience.
Well, I guess that's part of what you try. It's not only in rugby, but we show just more our emotions. So meaning you go from a group of 42 players to a group of 28 to prepare for the game, and then 23 for the game. I assume if you bring a guy like let's take, and I don't want to highlight him in a bad way, but let's take Grégory Alldritt. Grégory Alldritt has been the captain in the autumn test, and imagine in the mind of Fabien Galthié, he's not even part of the 23. I guess that's also something else to handle for the staff. I mean, extra job, extra explanation, and that's also what are the positions of each person in the squad. I mean, in the everyday life of a squad in a camp, you go from being a captain to being dropped. I guess you create another problem you have to sort of, depending on how each player will react. But if you know already he's not going to play, I also believe you'd rather not pick him. And I think, because you mentioned me earlier on, geez, that it could be a wake-up call. Well, I'm pretty sure with the experience those guys have, also under Fabien Galthié, that he's probably give them a call and explain to them what were the reasons and what was also maybe the areas they should focus on to work. And I mean, that's also something important, because I don't think by going to Marcoussis preparing for a game against Ireland, I don't think you can work on a specific skill or specific area of your game, because you're with a group that's preparing for a game, and you don't have time for yourself to focus on, say, you have to work on your defense, or you have to work on your rucks, or whatever it is. You don't have time to do the specifics, because the staff is not here to make you work your specifics. The staff is here to prepare a team to win a game. And but that brings me to a question for you, because I mean, you've been there with the Springboks, and actually that's a sort of double question I'm going to ask. First, you've been dropped. Well, actually not really, because your coach said he won't pick you again, and he's picked you again. But in between there weren't any international games, I assume. So you haven't really been dropped, but you were planned to be dropped. So how do you react as a player? Do you first, what's the importance of getting the right informations? Is why? Because you can be dropped just because you have a bad game doesn't mean you're a bad player, or doesn't mean you have to work in a specific area. It was just a bad day. So that's my first question: is how do you react when you know that you've had a bad game with the national team? And so that's and my second question is sort of, because you coached also in clubs. How do players react from a coach perspective? Like, say, obviously you coach the scrum at La Rochelle. Say a guy like Antonio or any other one, I'm thinking about it, obviously for the scrum, but could be any other player. He's not, so he knows his scrum, say, he's not at the top level. Does he come back to you and say, look, did you watch my game with France? Like, I need to work that and that. Can you help me? Or how does it work also from a player's perspective and from a coach perspective?
Okay. All right. Definitely. You French there. You took like 5 minutes to get that question right. No, brilliant question. So in terms of when I was a player, and that's a brilliant, because I actually wanted to talk about this. So obviously when you get dropped, you take a knock, and your ego takes a knock, and it lines up to what you said in terms of maybe it's a good decision not having those players there, because when you have been for so long starters and key players in a team, and now all of a sudden you're not in a match 23, that is tough. So I think maybe on the one side he's also protecting their ego, because he knows that potentially it's better for them to be in their club, potentially finding form. You know, that happened to me as well. You know, I was dropped in 2008. We played against the All Blacks. We won that first game in Dunedin, the House of Pain. It was brilliant. We went on after that against Australia, and Australia didn't perform as well like I did against the All Blacks. And then after that, I got brutally dropped. You know, like actually I was about to enter into the hotel in Sunnyside in Pretoria, and then Peter de Villiers just said to me, no, you're not traveling with us to Cape Town. You know, not really explaining, but there was a one-on-one which I had prior to that, where they were labeling that I needed to be fitter, I needed to work on this. But I was also so caught up in my own perception of things that I didn't feel what they said was justified or was right. So, you know, as a player, my advice would be definitely is you got to have a hard look at yourself. And where it really benefited me, and I think if you go back to, say, 2009, I played one test match in the Lions series, and then in the Four Nations when they beat the All Blacks, I think it was 2-3 times consecutive the Box. I didn't play in one of those games. And, you know, that felt like shit. I was super happy to be there, being part of it. When we won, we had some great celebrations as a team as well. But that's when I realized as a player, you know, okay, something needs to change. Something needs to switch. And that led on to me getting my ass handed to me by Castruvio Giovanni for Leicester Tigers. And that's when I was told I'll never play for the Springboks again. I was an embarrassment. So then I realized that something needs to switch. And that's when I had a hard, honest look at myself. And this is a story I've told over and over. So that's the key thing. When I had a hard, honest look at myself, that's when I changed. That's when I switched things up. That's when I put a clear strategy into place. And I definitely believe that is what players should be doing. When you get dropped from a team, I would say just put your ego aside. Just take a moment. Just take a step back. Okay, allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, that anger, maybe that embarrassment because your ego took a knock now, all your friends are still playing, they're still getting selected because a lot of those guys are tight. And then saying honest, okay, is it valid? Is my non-selection valid? You got to ask that. And you got to be brutally honest. You got to be honest with yourself. You got to be objective. And then you got to understand why. Why am I not selected? Obviously, you had a discussion with the coach. If the coach says you need to work on X, Y, and Z, you say, okay, I'm going to work on that and put a real plan and a real strategy. And, I can talk about other times, not just in terms of international team, but also Toulouse back in the day. I wasn't performing that well and I had to have a hard look, and we've had many discussions in the past. So that would be the key. For these players, my advice to them, Gaël Fickou, Damien Penaud, Gregory, who are key players in the French team, they need to, I'm not saying that their non-selection is due to poor form, but they also do have to have that conversation with themselves. Why wasn't I selected? Is what Fabien Galthié is sharing with me. Obviously, we don't have the context of that conversation. Is there credibility behind it? And what do I need to do? To answer your other question, in terms of coaches, we look at everything. We look at a player's behavior, you spot on there. And especially if a player has been dropped from a French team and is coming back into the club system, we look at him. We're expecting him to bring back something to the club, give energy to the club. And yes, there has been times, and you mentioned sometimes Latin players, they can be really upset. And then they're just not in the mood to train, or they're just not in the mood to perform. But some of them have come back as well with a point to prove. A never say die mindset, get back in the fight. And that would also be my advice to these three players who are not selected. You can't control that. Now you need to focus on your performance, your individual performance. What are you going to be bringing to your team in the club environment here in France? That's what you should be focusing on. So from coaches, we would look, but also in the past, I would have great discussions, for example, with Reda Vardy, for example, he wasn't playing or he wasn't getting selected. I said, okay, right, this is what you need to focus on. If you want to play, do this, do that. But a player needs to be conscious of where his level of performance is at. And he needs to be really conscious and obsessed on what he needs to do to improve. So I don't know if that answers your question, Damien, because I think that is very important for players to realize. But I'm going to put you now in a hot seat. All right, you're an agent of an international player that's been dropped. What do you tell him? What advice do you give to him?
Probably more or less the same than what you just said. I would say I will answer. It might sound like it's not about me, but I think the environment of a player is key in those moments, in the sense that I don't think my role as an agent is to tell a player he's the best when he's not. This is the role of his wife and his parents. And no jokes, but this is supposedly the reality. If you keep on telling a player as an agent, but don't worry, they're mistaken, or the coach is full of shit, or blah blah. So we always say players come, whether it's national team or no, and say, the coach doesn't like me, or he picks his favorite, or he chose this guy for X, Y, Z reason. I'm like, but the coach is like you, he wants to win. So if he chooses another guy ahead of you, it's because he thinks that other guy is going to help him win the game more than you. So you need to understand why. Sometimes we mentioned it can be strategical, and obviously there's politics and everything, like there's people you prefer or don't prefer. But a coach at this level will always choose who's the best. And I think as an agent, what I will tell the player is like, look, obviously the way it is done, especially in France, is probably a bit different than in the other countries, because say in England, for example, when they announce the team, there's no premiership game in between the announcement of the team and the time they go to camp. When in France, they announce the squad, they play a top 14 game, and then they will go to Marcoussis. So, which is hard call because there can be injuries. But what I mean is, I tell the players first to focus on his next top 14 game. If it was a bit different, I'll probably tell him to take 1 or 2 days for himself and think about it really deeply, and then try to help him find solutions, because the solution is, if you're not performing, there's something somewhere. Whether you're tired, whether it's a lack of fitness and you need to go back harder training, whether it's one area of the game that you manage less well in general, and you have to specifically work on, and then go to your coach and say in the club, and see if the coach is keen to help you, if there's enough resource at the club for you to be better at that. And otherwise, if there's not, you need to go and find the resource. That's where probably an agent can be helpful to find a specific coach outside of the club, or to find, I don't know, the right mental help as well. Because as you said, there's some guys that take it very hardly, and some guys very quickly, they switch on and they say, okay, I'm going to show them. I think you mentioned the ego. Last point about that. A real champion and a real guy with ego, he's not gonna mourn about it for a long time. His ego is gonna say, hey, I'm the best, and I'm gonna show them I'm the best. So back to work. I think that's what is a real top player. When he gets dropped, he goes back to work and proves his point.
Now, you made a valid point there, because if you think about it, it's tricky announcing that squad. We had 2 Champions Cup games now recently, and some very important games. Obviously, unfortunately, we saw La Rochelle didn't qualify. Toulouse, everybody wrote them off, and they came back and they smashed the Sale Sharks this weekend. But that could have an impact, maybe to give people insights, where I don't think it was a good thing, maybe for the selectors. It was great, get it out there, and players know so they can get organized and prepped for the weekend. Especially, I think maybe to where it does make sense is logistically. So players might play the Saturday or the Sunday. It will be easier for them to travel to Marcoussis and start from afresh. So I can understand where the French team is coming from. But where I don't agree with announcing that team is that because now some players might potentially slow down a little bit, protect themselves so that they don't get injured. All right. But then on the other side as well, where it's also a great opportunity, and where I think maybe Fabien is great, is creating competition, because 42 players have now been selected. Playing this week, it is an opportunity for them to get some extra credit in the bank with the selectors, for the upcoming Six Nations. So that was quite interesting that he selected. Because when I was a player back in the day, they would do it after the last game of that weekend. And it was actually a nice moment, because you would be with your teammates, you will watch the announcement. But, Damien, I think there's a lot to pick on, in terms of, do you believe where French rugby is going? We obviously know top 14 is probably one of the biggest competitions in the world. But do you see any points of worry in that French squad that has been selected?
Honestly, not really. Not to sound very arrogant, I'm gonna get a few messages like last time, but I think France got everything to be one of the top team in the world. And France won the Six Nations last year. Besides the fact that they lost a game still against England, but they won the tournament. And I guess anything can happen, and that's where it's very tricky to say, even if we are very close by the beginning of the tournament. But in the sense that you get guys like we were talking about, Calvin Gourg or Noah Nene or Grégory Alldritt, or literally guys that are not capped yet, or with just few caps, and they could surprise us. I really believe that they could really be good surprises, meaning also France would be a very good surprise. That's difficult. I don't think there's anything that we're lacking if you compare to some of the other best teams in the world. So the only thing, as you said, is probably to have a real plan B, because potentially, as you said, maybe before we've been a bit too extreme on. As we always change, as an example, we always change the fly half. Every game, the guy has a bad game, boom, we change. So now we haven't done that. We've been very consistent with mainly Romain Ntamack. So now he's injured, so he's going to be Mathieu Jalibert, which is good as well. I think, if you take the last World Cup, I don't want to speak again about the quarterfinal, but if you look at it, Romain Ntamack was injured when he was due to be the number 10, and maybe he was part of the 1 point missing at the end of the game. Dupont obviously got injured and rushed to come back from his injury to be on the pitch for the quarterfinal. And I believe you cannot rely on a few players, even though they're great players, play key positions. I think part of the job of the national team coach is to have different solutions. And if obviously Dupont, we're lucky to be in an era where we have a guy like Antoine Dupont. But what if he's injured at the next World Cup? Obviously, I wish for him and I wish for our national teams that he's going to play. But what if he's injured? Who's going to play? Who's going to take the lead and everything? And so it's important also, I guess, not to come back on what we were saying before, but to form new leaders, so to give experience to some of the guys to become leaders and not to rely on, we mentioned obviously the omission of Fickou, Alldritt, and Penaud. But what if they get injured going towards the next World Cup? So you need to have other guys that are gonna step up. If you look at the squad of France, just to give a quick how can I say, to put a focus on more details. You took the fullback position. Some of the players can play it, but for now the fullbacks are who? Thomas Ramos and Romain Buros. Thomas Ramos seems to be way ahead of everybody. But what if he's gonna miss? Obviously, I hope he's gonna play. If you look at the fly position, it says Ntamak and Jalibert. Who's the real number 3? So now we've got obviously Ntamak injured. So we've got Jalibert and Hugo Son. Hugo Son was playing 6 months ago in Pro D2. So if you want to bring him to the next World Cup, he needs experience. I don't know whether he's gonna play or not, but you see what I mean. I think that's where we need a lot of players to be involved. And we need also, that's question actually I'm going to ask you as a coach. We need players that can play probably different positions, like say loose forwards that can play lock, or 8 men that can play lock, or centers that can play wings that can play fullbacks that can play 10. Because I assume also, as a coach, it makes the selections most probably easier. And my question is a bit oriented towards what's been done in South Africa, where a lot of players, like we have the example of André Stuyvesant in November, are playing completely different positions, like with the backs or with the forwards. I assume the more solutions you have, the easier it gets.
Yeah, I think firstly I think what Fabien is doing at the moment, he's applying what we call the Erasmus method. All right. So he's now, I think what he's trying to do is potentially, once they're constantly changing the squad, but bringing in new blood, giving them the opportunity. And I think potentially, like you just mentioned there, that to trying to mold these players and also for them to become game winners. Because the question I actually wanted on you touch base on there. If you have a French team with no Thomas Ramos, no Emile Ntamak, no Jalibert, no Antoine Dupont, no LBB, can they still win a World Cup?
I will answer today, no.
No.
But
Okay.
in 18 months, with that type of selection, potentially, yes.
Okay, so that's the great thing about this discussion, but coming back to your question regarding the hybrid players, I think that's important, because if you look at the selection, that's why I think with that maybe plays, if you look at the type of players that have been selected, if you look at Olivon, he can play at lock, which is brilliant. You got the same with Cameron Walkie, flanker and lock. Paul Boudillon, flanker, lock and eighthman. So it gives you all of a sudden so many solutions. And then obviously sitting with a guy like Oscar Jégu, he has played at center at times when there were injuries or a yellow card or for the French team and for La Rochelle. So I do believe, but I don't think there could potentially be the profile at the moment where we have an example like Andre Esthuizen where someone goes. I think potentially if there was a Joe Dante who's injured, the moment that could have been something different. So I do believe it's important to have those players that can play different positions. So then when you find yourself in a scenario due to injury or potentially a card, that you actually don't find yourself in such a fragile position. If I've got to be honest. If you look at Temo Mathieu, for example, I believe he can, if needed, play on the wing. He's got speed, he's got acceleration. So that maybe makes sense. In terms of, if you look at Greg Alldritt, he's a strong player. but he only gives you one solution. The same with your Kwagga Smith. He's played sevens, so if needed, he can go into the back line, for the Springboks. But I do believe, after we've been discussing and listening to you, I think what Fabien is trying to do is something similar to what the Springboks is trying to, even though I won't say that 18 months is still a long time. People tend to forget 2019 World Cup before the Springboks weren't doing too great. So I do believe it's actually a great opportunity. But the question I have for you, Damien, all right, because we haven't actually spoken about this. Is it Thomas or Thomas Staniforth? All right, so he's been included in the squad. I didn't see that one coming. I would just like to get your take on that. An Australian playing for the French team, potentially, we don't know if he's going to get game time. What is your thoughts on that?
Look, first on the player. So Staniforth's been great for Castres. So obviously he's had a long injury before coming back, but before the injury, I think a couple of seasons ago, he was the best tackler in top 14. Works a lot. Put really his body on the line. So just from a performance point of view, it does make sense. He's been very good, and now he's obviously been. He spends 5 years in France, so he can be picked by France. He hasn't been capped by Australia before. Well, that shows one thing that's great for him, but that does highlight the fact that for number 5 lock, our number 5 is obviously number 4 for other countries, but for the let's call him the tighted lock, we struggle to have a lot of players in France just because, like, naturally or culturally, we don't have a lot of guys that are 2 meters or close by.
So you guys don't need biltong. That's why.
And more than 125 kgs. I guess that's not a problem of food. That's probably a problem of DNA or something like this. But more seriously, look, if he's a solution, if he's performing, good for him. But that shows something that back in the academies and stuff, we need to start looking properly at forming who's going to be the best tighted lock in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And that's very important because that's actually an area where we always struggle in France. Because if you look from an agent perspective, I guess every season, almost every club, say if you ask them what they're looking for, the position the most looked for is tighted lock. And probably, so it's not a message for anybody, but if you want to earn good money in rugby, playing tighted lock now is so hard to find. If you're good and if you work hard, you'll make good money. So you'll be in high demand anyway.
Now, look, I can tell you this. I've got a lot of experience in picking up weight. So if there's any tighted locks or guys that want to become a tight, reach out to me. I can give you a proper nutrition plan, a South African nutrition plan. We'll make sure you bulk up. It will require biltong. It will require beef. And obviously, the most important vegetable of all is chicken. Chicken, you can't have protein without chicken, so chicken's not a protein. Let's just be clear on that. In the South African mindset, it's probably the most important vegetable in South Africa. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff there. I'm really excited for what's going to lying ahead. But yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting. But yes, this was the question I actually wanted to ask you before we sign off, is that what are the French media saying at the moment? What are they saying about the non-selection of those 3 key players, Fickou, Alldritt, and Damien Penaud? What is happening in French media at the moment?
I think nobody. Well, in the media, there hasn't been any big scandal about it. Grégory Alldritt, unfortunately for him, is also playing at La Rochelle, and La Rochelle is not having the best season. They've just been dropped off Champions Cup. Damien Penaud is probably the media has been talking about his defense, and he's probably also I can't say in the shadow because they both play at the same time for the same team. But obviously, Louis Bielle-Biarrey has been very consistent in the past 6 months, and then for Fickou, maybe people are more surprised, but he's probably the oldest of the 3. So I guess that does kind of justify the decision. But what I would like to highlight also to answer that is the fact that you've got a lot of new players as well, because I guess the how can I say, the sort of hierarchy that there's been in the past few seasons in top 14 has changed a little bit. Where besides, so this season, besides Perpignan and Montauban that are fighting not to get relegated, all the teams are more or less safe at the moment, like they were ahead. You have obviously Toulouse having a very good season, like they've had in the past few seasons. But there's also Pau, and it's their first season being so consistent, and so they're now in the top 2. So that does explain as well why there's so many Pau players in the squad, and the fact that some of the teams, say you were expecting probably like Lyon, Racing, or whatever, have been probably a little bit more struggling, or La Rochelle. And I guess that does change also the who's on form, who's not on form. It's hard as an individual to shine when your team is struggling. That's actually also another question I will ask. I would like to ask you as a coach, and you're gonna understand the how can I say, the parallel I'm making between two situations. Say, so we were talking about Alldritt playing in a team that is not having the best season of their history. Say, when you were coaching at La Rochelle, as an example, if you look at so obviously when you look for the pros, you look at the espoirs, but for somehow that's a bad season for the espoirs and they lose every games. How do you still spot good players when they're losing every games? I think in certain positions, it's hard to shine when your team is losing every games.
Bullshit. I don't agree with you. No, I'm joking. No, that's a brilliant question. I'm just pulling your leg. I'm just pulling your leg. No, that's a brilliant question. And, I'm finally glad to see your journalistic skills is coming back again. You've kind of forgotten. It's brilliant. So that's a valid question. If a team is, obviously as a coach, certain players have certain traits. So let's say, for example, you got a prop and he's a strong scrummager, but he's playing in a weak pack and his pack gets destroyed in a scrum. So then it's tough to judge him on his scrum performance. But in the back of your mind, he's got the ingredients, he has the strength. So how will you test that, for example, as a coach? You will get him with the pro setup, see what he does in the scrum session. That will give you some reassuring information and some signs, so that will help it. But as a coach, you look at other things, because you do still get players that can perform in a losing team. All right, in your scenario, it was, okay, they're losing every game. It takes me back to 2010 when I was playing for the Springboks. It was one of our worst seasons, but I was still performing. I was still dominating. So there is still a way for you to stand out as a youngster, even if you're playing, because that's the thing. Coaches look at all behaviors. If you want to get opportunity as an academy player or as an espoir player, we say in France, coaches were looking at your training behaviors with the pros. So there you need to show stuff. You need to train with intensity. You need to train with purpose. You need to show them something. Like quelque chose. Show me something. So they will look. So often they will also be judged. So you do have that opportunity. So the performance of your academic team won't write you off completely, because really good coaches have that eye to identify that a player has something, has certain, and they'll try to contextualize certain things. Because if you're only going to evaluate the player and see the team is losing his performance, because sometimes as well, you also need to understand a player playing with the pros and he's played maybe 2-3 games with the pros, and now all of a sudden all the other players come back and now he goes back to the academy team. For that player, that it feels like he's been demoted. It feels like he's been dropped. So then sometimes his heart might not be in it, or it's not the same adrenaline rush like doing the warm-up with the pros in front of the crowd. So there's all those type of things that you got to take into account. But I think what I want to talk about now, Damien, is I think this is it just got me thinking as well. Maybe for people to understand the coach's mindset. Look, and we've seen it when teams are basing their foundations on key players, it doesn't work. And I think what Fabien Galthié is trying to do is really identify, right, this is the way we want to play. These are the type of players we want. This is the type of energy we need. We can't just rely on the magic of a LBB. But, Damien, I wanted to ask you this, because just from my agent's point of view, what is the commercial impact for players like Damien Penaud and Greg Alldritt, how does that impact them financially? Obviously, you get a fee for the French game and obviously in sponsors. But from an agent's point of view, if you're dealing with a player or you're representing a player that gets dropped, obviously the contract is set, but how does that impact the commercial side of things?
It's obviously a very bad moment because, commercially for an international players, where basically the most money you can make is for the World Cup or around the World Cup. And the thing is being dropped 18 months before, when probably in 6 months from now, you're going to start negotiating contracts for the World Cup and sponsors going around the World Cup. That's a serious bad timing. That shows one point. First is performance always come first. I guess that will be a bit different for the three of them, in the sense that Alldritt's been captaining France. Fickou's got 98 caps. Damien Penaud has got the record of tries for France. So I assume they will still get something. Do they rely on that? Well, it depends also what the future holds. It depends also when is their end of contract with their club. I assume some of them have still a bit of time. Some of them might not have that much time. And sometimes you see, and we're gonna have the answers in the next few weeks, months. Either they come back being very good for the club, and potentially they also come back for France, and there's no question anymore. Either they completely drop because they don't, how can I say, bounce back from that non-selection, and that means their career is going to be a bit different, I assume. That brings me actually to ask you another question as a player. Is it, I can give the agent's perspective that yes, you're thinking, okay, that's going to be a bit more difficult, but that wouldn't be my first thought as an agent. My first thought would be, how do I help him to keep or get back his warrior mindset to go back? Firstly, I'd think about that, and then we'll deal with commercial deals and stuff like this. My question is, you as a player, do you firstly think about your pride of a player and you want to come back, or do you think also, geez, I'm gonna take a sort of pay cut because maybe I'll lose some commercial deals, or I'll lose also the fee to play for my national team?
Yeah, I think it's different. There's a lot of things. If I have to be brutally honest, when you play at the international level, it's financially beneficial, so you benefit from that. So you do look at it there. But I think firstly, when you get dropped as a player from international level, there's that disappointment. And especially if you do not agree with your non-selection, look, as a player, if you're not on form and you don't get selective, the writing's on the wall. It's kind of justified. But maybe when you are performing or you feel that you are playing really well, then it's tough in his order. But my advice to players is that whatever your emotion is, whether it's disappointment, whether it's anger, whether it's frustration, just allow yourself to feel what you're feeling at that moment. But then you need to switch. You need to switch, and then you need to be brutally honest with yourself. Is my non-selection valid or not? If it is valid, that means you need to focus on, right, what's the plan? What you need to work on? You need to get back into the fight, or like you like to call that warrior mindset. That's what you need to do. And, then obviously when you look at the financial impact, it does play a role. Maybe the players have invested in something or where they require it. But at the end of the day, it is also a business. People also need to understand professional rugby players is a business. We're going to be ignorant if we're going to say players are just playing for the love of the game. But we do see those who really love the game, and are performing at the highest level. Those guys are invested. Those guys are, well, look, I have no idea what Mathieu Jalibert does, for example, like off the field. But what I've heard, he's not really someone that is a big party animal. He's someone that's quite serious. And you can see that, like we say in French, sensibilité, he has that feeling for the game. That is not just luck. That is someone that is super invested. But yeah, coming back to your question from a player's point of view, I think there's that disappointment that you're going to deal with from not being selected, maybe how your teammates perceive you or the public, how you're seen in the public. It might impact future sponsorships. It might impact certain events like players like the do appearances, where they get paid for it. So it does impact them financially. But at the end of the day, if you're only focusing on the financial side of things, then you got it wrong anyway. You can still think of the business side, but what you should be focusing is on the actual rugby side of things, which is key. So I don't know if I answered your question there.
No, you did obviously to highlight what was the first point. I mean, we kind of say the same thing about performance come first, and I guess like in any job, if you're good at your job, you're gonna make money.
No, well, I think maybe to kind of end of this podcast, because I've held you quite a bit already. It is Friday afternoon, and we know here in France, it's almost time for l'apéro. Even though I'm not drinking, I'm actually coming off a 20-day non-alcoholic stint. I haven't drank alcohol now for 20 plus days, but I am traveling to South Africa soon. So that probably might be breaking. I'll be focusing on the 3 most important B's in the life of, there's 4 B's. Right, it's the box, it's beer, it's braai, it's brandy. It's the most important thing. Unfortunately, the box are not playing, so I'll be focusing on braai, beer, and brandy. But it's almost time for the weekend, and we've got an exciting weekend lying ahead. But obviously, by the time people will be watching this podcast or listening to it, the weekend would have passed. But really looking forward to the matchup with Stade Toulousain and Pau. It's going to be an interesting one. And then also you got La Rochelle playing away against Clermont. And then there's also the matchup with Bordeaux and Stade Francais, that's equal on the table at the moment. But Damien, just on a more serious note, if you can give the real definition of apéro to the English speakers or viewers on this podcast, how important is apéro for the French people?
I guess, I think I was going to say I'm not a big apéro drinker, so I'm also like, it feels like I do dry January, but every month. Now, more seriously, apéro is more like that time in the weekend. It can be Friday evening. Like, I guess each family has got his own routine for apéro, because yes, we have a routine for that. Mostly it's the Saturday evening where people have their drink, like it can be their wine, or it can be brandy or whatever it is, and lots of snacks. So depending again from an area of France to another one, but I would say in a good family, you'll have plenty of very good snacks. So and that's just more like our social time. I'll compare it for South Africans. Probably it's like your braai, our apéro is your braai, and vice versa. Assume and that's probably
it's not the same. You can't compare apéro to braai. That you can't do that. I mean, I say there's beliefs involved. There's deeper meaning. No, I'm just joking.
Look, I've been lucky enough to experience both, and I like both. So
man,
like only mix both. But we've done that, you and I, in the past.
No, awesome. All right, guys, we've come to the end of our podcast. Just want to thank Damien for joining me today. I really enjoyed getting ready to go to South Africa and looking forward to connect. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast, I'll be hosting a call-up camp on the 14th of February in Pretoria for front row rugby players. I'll be sharing more on my social media platform. But most important, to help me to grow the show, the Coach G Show, I need your help. Please, a lot of you are listening to the podcast. You're sending me some unbelievable feedback and really means the world to me. But what I really need you to do is to subscribe to the show on whichever platform you are listening to, so that I can grow it. It was one of my biggest goals for 2026 is to move this podcast into in-person podcast. All right. But in order to do that, I need to help you guys. I need you guys to help me to really take the show to the next level. All right, Damien, thanks for joining me. All right, I know I've taken about a good hour and a half out of your work, and wish you all of the best for the weekend, and take it easy, and looking forward to our next chat. It's your second time on the pod. You're asking some great great questions. The inner journalist is coming out, and I'm looking forward to seeing a bit more of it.
Luckily, we didn't speak about the English or something like this. He probably saved me from having some haters. No, I'm joking.
Or like my daughter says, it's typical for oh la 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 la. All right, Damien, thanks for joining me. Have a good day. Ciao, ciao.
Bye bye.